you're just joining, we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. You are in the right place if you are here for the Climate Change AI Innovation Grants webinar. If you are not, then you are in the wrong place.
Okay, we are at 5 past the hour, so I think we'll get started. Yeah, so just as a reminder, we're here for the Innovations Grant informational webinar. We're going to give just a brief introduction to CCAI and the Innovation Grant program, and then we're going to spend most of the time just fielding questions from you all. So there is a question and answers form in the webinar. Feel free to post questions while we're going through this presentation, and afterwards we'll kind of go through those questions and try to give answers to as best as we can.
To answer the two questions that have already come in, because they are pertinent now, yes, the presentation is going to be a repeat of the first webinar. So if you went to the first webinar, you're not going to get additional information from this presentation, probably. Though we will again take your questions, and the questions will be different from the first informational webinar. Is this going to be recorded? Yes, it will be recorded, and the recording will be available afterwards.
Perfect.
Emily.
Okay. Great. So just sorry, having trouble shifting the slides. Okay, here we go. Just as a brief introduction to Climate Change AI for folks who are not already kind of part of the Climate Change AI community, CCAI is a global organization that works to catalyze impactful work at the intersection of climate change and AI. Sorry, can you all still see my slides?
No, your slides disappeared.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Technical difficulties.
Let me know if I can. Okay.
Okay, here.
It works.
Great. Thanks. Sorry, everyone. Thanks for your patience. Yeah, so CCI working at the intersection of climate change and machine learning through building communities of diverse stakeholders, guiding impactful work through educational resources and programs, and filling gaps in essential infrastructure through programs of funding like the Innovation Grant that we're going to talk about today, tools, and building databases, as well as advancing discourses and advising relevant players in the space at the intersection of climate change and AI. And just a little bit more specifically about some of the work that we're doing at CCAI and some of the resources that we provide. So you can learn a lot more about CCAI at our website, climatechange.ai. But just as a brief overview, on that website, there's a bunch of digital resources, so reports with opportunities for researchers, policymakers, practitioners that you can go through and kind of learn more about this intersection and this space if it's of interest. We also host a lot of conferences and events. So, for example, at the upcoming NeurIPS conference, there will be a climate change and AI workshop, and you can view the past papers from previous workshops that CCI has hosted at a number of conferences and other venues. We also host a summer school, which hopefully some of you were able to participate in. There's a kind of an open virtual summer school that we've hosted the past few summers, as well as an in-person summer school that you can apply to attend. CCI has funding programs like the innovation grants that we're going to talk about today. And we also have a newsletter, blog, and community platform that I encourage you all to join if you're interested. Just a little bit more about this webinar and what we're going to kind of cover. First, a disclaimer that we're going to present to the best of our ability, kind of the main questions that might come up as you're starting to apply for this grant. But the information on these slides is subject to change, and for the most accurate and up-to-date information on the innovation grants and any eligibility criteria, etc., visit our innovation grants website, and the information there is kind of the information that you should refer to. We're going to do a Q&A after our brief presentation. So submit your questions in the chat and we'll go through them kind of after we go through our presentation. Just try to be as general as possible with your questions so that other participants can learn from the answers. And understand that we're going to try to answer all of the questions, but there may be certain questions that we can't answer due to fairness reasons. And if your question doesn't get addressed, either we run out of time or otherwise, feel free to email grants@climatechange.ai and we will try to get back to you as quickly as possible and answer any questions that you have. Just briefly, some highlights from previous grant cycles. So over the past 2 years, the Innovation Grant has funded 22 innovation grants that have been funding research across 62 institutions and 22 countries, with about $3 million total awarded over the past 2 years. And you can see on the right-hand side that these grants have kind of ranged a lot in the domains that they capture. So everything from power and energy systems to forestry and other land uses, as well as climate justice and adaptation. If you want to see some examples of funded projects, you can read all about last year's funded projects on our website. There's a blog post. And you can kind of see, again, the range of projects that have been funded this past year as well as the year previously. And I'll hand it off to David.
Fantastic. So I guess we also didn't introduce ourselves. I'm David Rolnick. I am one of the chairs and co-founders of CCI.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm Millie. I am on the core team at Climate Change AI and one of the chairs of the Innovations Grant Program.
And we're professors in different capacities in AI and climate change in our spare time outside of Climate Change AI. So the basic details of this grants program are that we are awarding up to $150K US per proposal for projects of 12 months in duration. The total amount will be up to 1.4 million in grants across all the projects. Scope, which we'll get to in more detail shortly, is projects at the intersection of AI and climate change. The rough guidelines on eligibility are that we'll get into more details on this. This is important. The PI has to be affiliated with an accredited university in an OECD member country. Again, we'll get into more details on this. But that restriction does not apply to co-investigators. There is a submission deadline September 15th, anywhere on Earth. There's a Q&A, there's a question in the chat. Is it September 5th? Sorry, 15th or 10th? It is September 15th. There was one place where it erroneously said September 10th. If you found other places where it still says September 10th, please let us know. It should be September 15th. That is the submission site, and we'll go through sort of Q&A to how to deal with that submission. And this is the contact information. We're really grateful for sponsorship from the Quadrature Climate Foundation, Google DeepMind, and Global Methane Hub, as well as fiscal sponsorship from the Canada Hub of Future Earth International. To answer another question in the Q&A, since again it's topical, the slides, the entire recording will be posted afterwards. So let's dive into more details on eligibility, since this is what a lot of people are eager to understand. The PI has to be affiliated with an accredited university, by which we mean a degree granting institution, nonprofit degree granting institution, and that has to be in an OECD member country. These are the OECD member countries. If the country is not listed there, it is not an OECD member country. This is purely administrative. This is not because we think that OECD member countries are the best countries. They are just some set of countries which we can administratively offer funding to directly. However, co-investigators can be at an institution that's not a university. They could be at a company, they could be at a public organization, anything. And they can be outside OECD member countries. And co-investigators can have lots of funding assigned to them. There is no limit on the amount of funding that co-investigators can have allocated to them. So theoretically, the funding could go to the lead institution, but then it could all get reassigned to co-investigators. It is completely up to you. We very much welcome lots of organizations partnering together. And typically, if you look at past grants, you'll see that's what has happened. Importantly, no aspect of a project should be double funded by other funding bodies. This is not a scary requirement. This is just saying literally the same thing cannot be funded twice. The project can have other sources of funding, but they cannot fund the same literal thing. You cannot get reimbursed twice for the same expense. Okay. Next slide, please. There is a dataset requirement. All projects in any of the tracks of the competition have to include a new dataset. That does not have to be the main deliverable, but it has to be a deliverable. There is a special track on dataset gaps where this should be the main deliverable. In the other tracks, that's not the case. It doesn't have to be the primary focus. There are things called fair data principles. If you're not familiar with them, you can look them up. Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. The dataset has to be compliant with those. Creation is broadly defined. That could include annotating data with labels, collecting completely new data, collating existing data from multiple different sources, creating a data simulator, as long as it's not really far removed from reality, or open sourcing existing data that was formerly private. Lots of different definitions. Another requirement is that all grant IP, including the data or simulator produced, and if applicable, any trained models or descriptions of architectures, training procedures must be made publicly available under an open license. Important to bear in mind, especially if partners are private companies. It is fine for partners to be private companies. However, all grant IP must be made publicly available under an open license. Okay, so different tracks. Main track is open to projects in any of the following areas. First of all, this is sort of the main bucket, which we assume many projects will fall into: AI or machine learning for climate change mitigation, adaptation, or climate science. Some examples include, but aren't limited to, climate change mitigation, including agriculture, buildings and cities, heavy industry, power systems, waste, transportation, forestry, many other areas. Machine learning applied to climate change adaptation, for example, disaster prediction, management, and relief. Machine learning for earth science, ecosystems, and natural systems as relevant to climate change. Machine learning for research and development of technologies like electrofuels and carbon capture or sequestration. Machine learning approaches in behavioral and social science related to climate change, for example, as related to climate finance and economics, climate justice, and climate policy. The next bucket, or two buckets, which this can fall into, are, first of all, AI governance in the context of climate change, and assessment of the greenhouse gas emissions impacts of AI or AI-driven applications. These two areas may be exempt from the dataset requirement simply because there may not be a relevant dataset. So you are welcome to submit projects in any of these three areas. In the first bucket, the dataset requirement applies, and the last two, it may not apply if there's no relevant dataset. That's the main track. There is a special track this year on methane. This means projects using AI or machine learning to address problems in methane-related climate change mitigation in the short or medium-term period. That's defined as well before 2040. Example areas include, but are not limited to, energy, including coal mine methane, ventilation air methane, flaring, methane leak detection, super emitters, and methane emissions from oil and gas. waste and circular economy, including food loss and waste recovery, food organic waste separation, dumps or landfill emissions, wastewater treatment and sludge management. Agriculture, including livestock, manure management, biomass burning, and rice cultivation. There is another special track on dataset gaps this year, and this has submissions should have as their primary focus the creation of a documented dataset or simulator, same definition as before, created by collating, labeling, or annotating existing data, and or by collecting, simulating, or otherwise making available new data that can enable further research. Importantly, this should be enabling further work. It doesn't have to be research, enabling further work in AI or machine learning for climate action. So think about all of the projects which were possible for the main track, and think about the data that's needed to make those projects a reality. That is what this dataset gaps is. It's saying, how do we fill gaps that would enable AI or machine learning work for climate change? How do we fill those dataset gaps? The eligible project areas are, again, the same as in the main track. Applicants should highlight the particular gap in dataset availability that this project aims to address and why this is important for climate change mitigation or adaptation in the context of AI or machine learning. Again, the role, why AI or machine learning is relevant here is data sets that would enable AI or machine learning work in tackling climate change. It is not, let's use AI to create data sets. It is, let's use data sets to enable AI. Let's use data sets to enable AI work. So theoretically, you could submit here with no AI at all, as long as the data you're creating is important for AI and machine learning in climate change. So proposals in the special track on dataset gaps may also request support from a Google DeepMind researcher. This is completely separate from the financial award, and it's not really something you need to address in your application, except that you need to tick a box in the CMT submission form. You don't have to plan out what the person is going to do. You just have to tick a box and say roughly what might you be interested in. No guarantees, but you can request support. That is, again, in addition to a financial award. Okay, this is the timeline. The notification of results will be in December. The award start date is, the standard award start will be in February, and then the end date, since it's 12 months later, is the next February. Evaluation criteria. First and foremost, climate relevance. This is a climate change call. The goal is climate impact. Most important thing. AI and machine learning relevance. Important, but not about fancy AI or machine learning. The goal is whatever you're proposing relevant to the problem? Is it what is the right method for the job? It can be very simple. AI and machine learning is here defined as anything from the fanciest, shiniest technology to random forest. It's a very broad definition of AI and machine learning. Dataset quality and impact. If you are providing a new dataset quality and impact is important. Project pathway to impact is important. We tackle projects at various stages in the innovation pipeline. It can be many different technological readiness levels. It can be preliminary research down to much more close to large-scale deployment. There is a wide range of places in the pathway to impact that we can be working on, but the pathway to impact has to be specified. It has to be well thought out. That's if you're early on or late on, you still have to understand the full pathway to ultimate impact. Ethics is important. If you do something unethical, that's bad. If you do something more ethical, that's good. Feasibility. Consideration of ethics principles throughout the project. Feasibility is also important. If you're proposing something that's unfeasible, that's bad. The expertise of the team, which will depend upon the particular project. Relevance to the project. The following will be considered favorably as well. Deployment partners. People who are involved in the project from the start, who are going to be involved in carrying that through to impact. Those can be funded or unfunded deployment partners. Traditionally unfunded areas of work or underfunded areas of work. And equity considerations. There are parts of the application which address different pieces of this. We're not going to go through the full application requirements. It's a 12-page proposal. There are different sections. Look online for details on those particular sections. I do want to touch on one particular part, which is separate from the 12-page proposal, which is the budget. The total budget has to be submitted in an itemized, in a single PDF, which includes an itemized budget, total amount requested, how these funds will be used if a grant is awarded. Do not ask for more money than you need. We will award up to 150K USD. It doesn't have to, you don't have to request the full amount. Budget justification. Eligible expenses include lots of different things. Salaries for PIs and research staff, also stipends and tuition for students, equipment, software, and compute. If you're doing field work, that could be an eligible expense. Expenses associated with project-related travel, like conferences, including dependent care, so child care, elder care, all eligible. Overhead, importantly, a maximum rate of 10% is overhead. That means any indirect expenses. Contact us if you're unclear about what overhead means. This 10% is important. It is across the entire budget. It includes the PI institution and all its partners. We don't care where that overhead goes. It can go to the PI institution. It can go to the co-PI institutions, whatever. So you should ask about this if you have not dealt with this before. Most institutions have rules on overhead. Those rules may say that they require significantly more than 10% overhead. Those rules are often flexible. Talk to your institution. The institution will often say that they can actually make it work for a lower overhead than is the default policy. Talk to your institution. If you're having difficulties with something, talk to us and we can help explain it to them. This is a requirement, but there are ways that one can talk to one's institution to have this work out. In many cases. Just clarifying again, that funds will be contracted solely to the PI institution. Any further dissemination of funds is fine according to the budget and budget justification, but it has to be managed by the lead institution, and the lead institution will deal with that allocation. Okay. I will hand it back now to Millie to discuss the application process.
Great, yeah. So just briefly kind of on applying and actually submitting your application, just to reiterate, the deadline is September 15th. Apologies that there was a inconsistency for that, which should be updated on the website. But if you find that it's not, feel free to ping us. But I think it should be updated now. The CMT website, so the submission website, is linked here and also multiple places on our website. So definitely make sure you have the right submission website, and some things to ensure that you prepare before trying to submit your application. So you'll need basic information about the PI, so the principal investigator and the team. So the first name, oh, also just note that the first name that you enter in the CMT author list should be the principal investigator and will be treated as the principal investigator. So that's really important, particularly if your team doesn't have its entire group at eligible institutions. So you need to make sure that that PI is the PI who will be kind of administered the grant funding, and is listed as the first author in the CMT. Other things that you'll need in the submission form are a project description, which is 12 pages, single PDF, in the same order and with the headers for the subsections that we describe more in depth on our website. You'll also need the budget and the budget justification that David just went over, and you'll need CVs of key personnel, which will be aggregated into a single PDF. So that's kind of the gist of what will be uploaded to the CMT. Just briefly, when you sign into that CMT link, you'll see more or less what you see here. There's sometimes confusion. I was confused the first time I did this, that you do need to press this create new submission form. You won't see the submission form just right when you click on that link. You do need to click this create new submission. And when you click that, you'll see kind of the full submission form where you'll be able to upload all of those documents that we said and include information on the investigators that are part of the grant. And that's all we have for our presentation. And we're going to start to work through the questions that have been asked in the chat. So feel free to continue to add questions there. We'll get through as many as we can. And again, contact us at grants@climatechange.ai if you have any additional questions or we don't get to the question that you've asked in the chat.
Great, so let's take some questions. We already have a lot of questions, about 40 questions. So let's start going through. First question, is there a matchmaking function, or are we, for example, small to medium-sized enterprises with limited resources expected to find university partners? So we do not have a matchmaking function, at least not yet. Something that we may be working on as an organization, but the resource that we have for finding partners, I would suggest going to the following websites, which I will type in the chat, if I can find the chat. Wait, everyone, okay, yes. So this is our community platform, community.climatechange.ai. So if you go to community.climatechange.ai, the URL, you can find a place to ask for potential partners to work with you, say who you are, what you want to work on, see if people will join it. That is one place to go. You can also search for particular areas in our list of accepted papers from past events. The URL here is climatechange.ai/papers. And if you go to climatechange.ai/papers, you can search for, through a database of about 1,000 different peer-reviewed papers, including lots of different authors from many different institutions. And some of those may be interested in partnering with you. So those are two resources where you can try to find partners. You can also just contact people separately without those resources. Those are the kinds of resources that we try to make available to our community and helping people find partners. So yes, we do have resources.
Okay, great. Next question. Are creating AI protocols for data sets / quality in scope? That's a great question. I think one thing to reiterate is that within scope, like the evaluation criteria, I think is probably the best thing to refer to when we're thinking about like what is in scope. So is your project impactful? Do you have like a pathway to impact for your project? So I think maybe it would require a little bit more specificity as to like what
Yeah, I'm
what
not
AI
sure exactly what
protocols.
this means.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, are you talking about a protocol for running AI on a particular data set? A protocol development could potentially be a deliverable. Yeah. If it's, yeah, we need to understand a little bit more about that. And we can't really answer questions about what is in scope, whether a particular project is in scope. We can talk about broader guidelines. So I would look through the guidelines and see, based upon more detail on what you're thinking about, whether it meets the criteria. Are the proportions of the domains that were funded indicative of the priority areas that are more likely to be funded? No. In the past, I mean, it's just a question of what we receive proposals in and which projects we think should be funded. We're not going to fund the same kinds of projects as a previous year, probably, because we get different excellent projects in. Yeah, it's not like we're more into the areas that we funded a lot of before. It's just, yeah, stochasticity.
Okay, great. Next question, what is OECD? I think we covered that. I think that was asked prior to the presentation. And again, check on the website for the kind of full eligibility requirements.
Importantly, OECD member countries, not partner countries. There are all kinds of partners. There are all kinds of countries which are listed on the OECD website. There is a particular set of countries. It is 38, I believe, countries, which are OECD member countries. Check the list, which is on our website. You're not on that list, then you can absolutely apply as a co-PI institution. You just need to apply with an institution that is in one of those countries. We do not disclose how many applications were received in a particular year, but how many were funded, and the particular ones that were funded, you can check it out on our blog. The blog post is here. I put it in the chat. That's also stuff that we listed in the presentation.
Okay, how are you addressing and assessing gender equity in the creation of ML and data sets scope? I think this might be another question that maybe is more specific to a given project potentially. Either that or I'm misinterpreting the question. David, do you have
So we
anything to add?
discuss how we're considering equity a little bit um in our call. But it will depend upon the particular project, really. It includes the nature of the research, the composition of the team, the nature of the stakeholders outside the team who will be worked with. Those are some of the considerations in general by which we assess equity. But it depends on the project. And that's equity overall, not specifically gender equity. Do you want to take the next one?
Yeah. How many selections will be awarded? Roughly 10 question mark. So we don't have a specific number of projects that will be awarded. We kind of have a set amount of funding. And again, we limit the amount of funding per project to $150,000. But as David said, you don't need to ask for $150,000. And so you could imagine a case where there are more grants funded for less money or just a set of grants funded for the maximum amount. So we don't have a set number of grants that we're going to fund.
There are two questions which I'm going to answer together because they're very similar. Does the PI need to have a PhD? And do they have to be professors? So do they have to be professors? Almost certainly not, but it depends. And this is also the answer to the other question. It depends upon the institution. We do not require the PI to have a PhD or to be a professor. However, they have to be eligible to hold grant funds at an accredited university, which is a nonprofit degree granting institution, again, at an OECD member country in this case. So it depends upon the standards of the institution. In my experience, typically that includes people with title of some form of professor or people with title of some form of postdoc often, though not every institution will let postdocs hold grants as a PI. Professors at various institutions have PhDs. Professors at some institutions do not have PhDs. If you are eligible to hold a grant, regardless of your title, we will be happy to, you are eligible. It is simply a question of what your institution counts as eligible, assuming that your institution is an eligible institution. So hopefully that answers your question.
Great. Next question. When will the funds be dispersed? So in the timeline, we outlined that the projects will be awarded in December and ideally or kind of normatively, the projects will start in February, correct? Of 2025. So the project funds will be dispersed at the beginning of the project.
In a lump sum. There's a sub-question here. If the co-investigator works for a company, how is the project redistributed between the PI and the co-I? That's up to you to determine in your budget and your budget justification. You can distribute it however you see fit. You have to tell us. I think we already answered this question.
Yeah.
And this one too. Wow, there are a lot of questions about whether the PI can be, like what level. Hopefully we answered that. Please tell us if we didn't clarify your questions about whether the PI has to be a professor and stuff, because there were a lot of questions about this. We already answered that one. Deliverables for the datasets track. The main deliverable is a dataset. It's a dataset or simulator that should enable additional work in climate change and AI or machine learning. There are a lot of options for that. There can be other deliverables, but the principal deliverable for the datasets track has to be the dataset. In the other tracks, the principal deliverable can be lots of things. There can be many principal deliverables.
Okay, next question is about finding a PI that is eligible for accepting grant funding. I think David posted the community platform, which we encourage you to use to try to find collaborators. But yeah, unfortunately, we did not do a meet and greet or kind of
We do have
make
happy
a
hours
space.
fairly regularly at Climate Change AI. So
Yeah,
we actually
that's
do
true.
have meet and greets already. Like
Yeah.
we have them throughout the year. So we have happy hours if you want to, but that's not specifically designed for this. I do think that posting in the community platform and going to search again, I'll post these links again if you just joined. These links are the community platform is here. And if you want to search for papers, so authors of these papers could be relevant if you search for relevant. There. Mhm.
Okay, next question. Is synthetic data okay for the data set requirement? Yes. I think
Yeah.
that simulated or synthetic data is appropriate if it's appropriate in the context of your project. So yeah, and or synthesizing data that already exists. So yeah, we're pretty
Yeah.
there's a pretty broad definition of data and data set. And so yes.
Grant IP. What if a private company has pre-existing IP that will support the grant? Must that be made openly available? If it was not created as part of the grant, then it does not need to be made openly available.
Okay, great. My institution takes overhead greater than 10%. Am I still eligible to apply? So the 10% overhead is a constraint on this funding. You can't ask for more than 10% overhead. That being said, and I think as David presented, a lot of institutions have higher overhead than 10%, but will make exceptions in the context of funding that doesn't allow for greater than 10%. So I think talking with the grants office at your university is first order of business in this context.
There was a question saying, universities in the UK allocate higher overheads. That's the case for many universities in Canada as well, where I am based. You will notice that we do have grants already made to universities in the UK. So clearly that worked out for those particular universities in the UK at least. So talk to your university. There are different ways of doing this in particular. So like here, let me just specify one particular thing. Like some universities will do a thing where they just simply drop the requirement. Some universities will do a thing where they say, okay, but another grant has to pay for the additional overhead. And that is annoying, but it does still mean that the project gets more money in. So like that's another way that some universities deal with this. But if you ask them, sometimes the requirement just is removed. Sometimes. Is one PI allowed to submit two different projects for two different tracks? You can submit two different projects for the same track. If you have time to do that, it may not be a good idea, but we'll consider them. What you can't do is submit the same project to two different tracks. We will remove one of them if you do that, and we will remove it randomly. So do not submit the same project to two different tracks. Pick your best guesses to the track. We might move something between tracks, but we will not review the same project twice.
Okay, next question. Is someone from a research institution, charity in the UK eligible to apply as a PI? The institution needs to be a nonprofit degree granting institution. So if it is not that, then you are not eligible to be the PI.
Same thing for the next question. If it's a nonprofit tech organization, not a university, that's also, yeah.
The meeting is recorded and it will be available as is the first webinar. I think we just did that.
Getting a lot of repeat questions, which is totally reasonable. How strict are the start and end dates? So if your dates need to be something different, you can propose something else. We are amenable to requests to change the granting period. You shouldn't count on that being the case, but we are amenable to change requests to change the granting period somewhat. The reporting requirements may change in that there may be another interim report, for example, if the period changes.
Okay, the next question is about tracks. If you don't feel like your project fits neatly within one track versus another, take your best guess. Where do you think it fits best? Again, we're not going to review it in both tracks, so choose. If we feel like as process chairs it fits better in another track, we may move your proposal. But yes, take your best guess.
Can you submit applications in different focus areas? The focus areas are not something you have to even really like select. It's a track thing. You select the track, but there are those bullet points of like mitigation, adaptation, blah, blah, blah. If you overlap multiple ones of those, that's fine.
Um,
I'm not sure I understand this question.
yeah, I'm not sure I understand that question either. If the person who submitted that wants to resubmit,
Is there
maybe.
rates for different categories of researchers? We don't understand quite what this means. So yeah.
Contact person for overhead related questions. I think I assume that's what OH means.
That should be your university.
Yeah.
University, not us. If there's truly a question that we can answer, then you can contact this email address right here.
The 12 pages does include references, so, right?
No, sorry, it doesn't.
Oh, doesn't include
Doesn't
references.
include references.
I bet.
I had to
Yeah.
check on this though. But it doesn't include references, but it does include figures. You're not
Yes.
allowed additional pages for figures. That is included in the 12 pages, but the references can be. There are full details on this on the website, including like details on the sections that you need in the project description, right? Like you need to have a summary, you need to have a project outline, deliverables, timeline, team, pathway to impact, etc. Read the details on the website. Mhm. For the datasets track, can it also include technology or tools to make existing datasets more easily accessible? So we define making a dataset as potentially making it accessible. That said, if the goal is not to literally give people access to the dataset, it's enabling people to work with it, like a software front end or something, that would not be eligible. If it's literally enabling people to get to the data, which was previously not really accessible in any meaningful way, then yes, you can make a case for that. Take a look on the website if you're on.
Okay, the next question is about project timelines and no cost extensions. So in your project proposal, you will need to create a project timeline and justify it. And you will be, to some extent, evaluated on the feasibility of your project. That being said, we do offer non-cost extensions in certain cases. So yes, and also try to create your project in such a way that it fits within the 1-year project timeline.
What constitutes publication of a data set? I'm afraid this is too specific to an individual project. I'm not sure we can. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure that we can answer that. And with respect to IP, if there's IP that you're using that was previously developed before the grant, that's not there's the open access requirement doesn't apply, but anything that's developed as a result of the grant, that does apply.
The next is again about eligibility. If your university doesn't process funding less than 500K, can it be handled by a nonprofit? No, again, the eligibility is pretty strict in this case as to where the funds can be distributed to.
I think this was already answered. I think we already answered IP related details. Correct. A dataset in the special track on datasets gaps is intended to enable machine learning or AI research, not we used machine learning or AI to build the dataset. That is correct. If you use machine learning or AI to build the dataset, that is not a plus. Like sometimes you may end up doing that, but generally speaking, that is not a Yeah, that will generally speaking not be what one does. Does that also apply to data sets generated under the main track? Correct, yes. So yes, oftentimes people will produce a data set that is what they use to train machine learning algorithms. There could be data which is produced by a machine learning algorithm as well, but yeah.
Can funds be allocated to budget for a course release for the PI and co-PI?
Ooh, I don't think we've gotten that question before. Um, Email us. We're going to have to decide on a policy. I think that's actually never come up. Please email us. Does CCI provide computational resources? No. But you can use the funding to pay for computational resources. That's a perfectly reasonable budget item.
Cool. Could you briefly show the methane track slide again? We're probably not going to go back in
Yeah,
slides.
you can go to
However, yeah, this will be posted. Yeah, so you can go back to the slide.
the DeepMind researcher. Are they like a team member or are they like a consultant? They're like a consultant with a few hours per week dedicated to the project.
The requirement to submit letters of commitment or support from unfunded collaborators or the end user of the data set. No, it is not a requirement to submit letters of commitment.
Page limit requirement. Yes, as we've said several times. There are details on the website. Take a look at the details on the website for what the proposal needs to be.
Defining affiliated with an institution, it just means that you need to be able to accept grants through that institution, which is generally a PI, but varies again, university to university as to who is considered a grant eligible university affiliate. So reach out to your institution.
Already answered this, already answered this. Um, 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 is the special track on dataset gaps category equally evaluated than the others? I'm not sure what that means. We evaluate all of them. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
You don't have a fixed number in each track either.
Yeah. Sometimes it's fairly hard to receive grants from the US when at an EU institution. I don't think that has been a problem in previous years, and yeah, we can distribute grants to any OECD country.
Or were you worried about subgrants? We can't comment on whether subgrants from a US institution would be a problem. Unfortunately, that's not within our jurisdiction. You don't need to contact a DeepMind researcher. You just need to say, hey, maybe if a DeepMind researcher were available, I might use them. It's you are allowed to, like, DeepMind could be a partner organization, but it shouldn't be a partner organization because you want to use that thing. If you want to use that thing, you just don't talk to Google DeepMind. You just do your thing, and then maybe Google DeepMind provides you a researcher. If you are already working with Google DeepMind, you're allowed to put them down as a partner. But like, don't put them down as a partner because of that requirement.
This is a question about enabling AI with your data set versus like using AI to create your data set. I think, and whether or not we have examples of something involving data labeling.
So for example, if you were creating a data set that was a lot of pictures of trees with the amount of carbon stored in them, or something like that would be an example of a data set where labeling some data, and it could be used if you were trying to use an AI classifier to predict this. So it would be a data set that would be catalyzing additional work in using AI in this space. Just one of many, many examples. I think we already
Yeah, we already answered that.
we already answered that. We already answered that. We already answered that. Sorry. Social sciences within scope, if it meets the relevant criteria. Yes, the granted projects are available on our website.
All the submission elements or the elements of the proposal are outlined on the website, so check that out. And we give details about what should be captured in each kind of subsection of the application. I think if I'm
Yes, we do.
in.
Is the submission through the institution's Office of Research and Sponsored Programs or simply submitted by the PI? It is simply submitted by the PI, but you may need sign off by your Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. Most universities require you to have talked to them, so talk to them.
Can community building efforts be funded as well through this grant, e.g. organizing a workshop? Yes, that can be, I think, part of your budget if you can justify it as an important part of your project and as kind of critical to the impact of your project.
Other sources of funding. Costs can be shared with other sources of funding. Yeah, you just can't literally fund the same thing twice. You can't make a profit off of this. It can be an extension of existing project, but you want to distinguish it from the existing project.
Who are the evaluators from which disciplines? So each project will be reviewed by multiple reviewers. I don't think that we have like set disciplines for the scope of reviewers for each project. So assume that your reviewers could be coming from a diversity of disciplines and or subdisciplines, but they will have some expertise at the intersection of AI or machine learning and climate change.
What kind of support can the DeepMind researcher provide? So we do not have full details on this, but the let me you should again consider them to be like a consultant. Sorry, you're still sharing your screen, really.
Sorry.
They should be you should think of them like consulting researcher for a few hours a week. You can describe what kind of support you want them to provide in a box in the CMT. Yeah, we can't guarantee this.
I think this was referring back to a previous question about outcomes of projects. So on our website, we have posts about kind of the scope of projects that have been funded and little posts about those projects. However, a lot of those projects are still ongoing, so they don't necessarily have all of the deliverables outlined as well on the website.
Do the PIs need to be multidisciplinary or from multiple organizations? No, the PI can be from a single organization. They can have a single discipline. The team is often going to be multidisciplinary, but a single person need not be. No requirement on that.
Do you need to partner with a stakeholder in the proposal? Will the proposal be reviewed more favorably if one of the team members is from a stakeholder company? If having a stakeholder as part of your proposal or your team makes the project more feasible and or more impactful, then it will be evaluated favorably, but it is not a requirement of the grant program.
IP, source code. So there's a difference between making something openly available and like not having any rights to it at all. I'm not going to go into details of possible IP, but something does have to be made public. It does have to be made openly available if it is created as a result of the grant. Um, will there be reason told if the proposal is not approved? We'll give some description. There'll be some explanation of from the level of meta review, I believe. Um, um, there will be some remarks. They may be more or less useful to you.
I think we already answered the extension question. Can we publish a summarized aggregated version of the data set, or does the entire data need to be shared?
Entire
Yeah,
data.
yeah.
Unless the data set is a summarized or aggregated version, but you can't say, we had this data set, it was great, but we're only going to give you a compressed version of it.
This seems to be a question about double funding of research. Like, how do you ensure that it is?
Yeah, I think we've already dealt with this. Co-investigators and deployment partners. Oh, deployment partner can be named as a co-investigator, or they could not. A co-investigator is somebody who's explicitly an applicant on the project and who might or might not receive funding, generally would receive funding. You could be partnering with people who do receive funding as well as people who don't receive funding.
How would an
You don't
educational
have to
aspect?
do research, by the way. It doesn't have to be. This doesn't have to be just for research. Um, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, it's all good. How would an educational aspect of the proposal be viewed, such as creating a project-based course or open source course materials? I think if you can fit it within the scope of your project, and again, our evaluation criteria, then that is totally within scope of a project deliverable.
It will not help you meet the criteria that aren't about that in particular. There isn't a criterion for dissemination. How late can the project start? There isn't a there's a set time frame. You can request exemptions to it, but we don't guarantee that. So if you can make a case for it, feel free to discuss to propose that. But you should plan on being within the time frame that's specified. There will be a recording given of the Q&A as well as of the presentation.
This is a question about OECD member countries are what are eligible. So yeah, again, check out our website, and the list that we have on that website is the member countries of OECD.
There are many countries which appear in some form on the OECD website. That does not mean they are technically an OECD member country. We're sorry. You're not going to. We had a request in the past whether we could enable a country to become an OECD member country. We also cannot do that. Geopolitical negotiations are beyond our capacity. It is 38 specific countries.
Can we preview the contract between?
I haven't decided on the contract, so we can't tell you the contract yet.
Great. We will share the presentation.
Yep, that was answered. That was answered. You can see past projects on our website. No limit to the number of grant applications that a single person can be on. We have run out of time, however. I think that we're going to have to stop the webinar at this point. I think we've actually answered most of these questions.
Yeah, I'm scrolling through them now to see if there's any like really specifically new ones. But yeah, I think we've answered the bulk of the questions. And again, feel free to reach out to our grants@climatechange.ai website or email address if you have a really specific question that you think needs to
And
be.
consult everything on the website. We didn't talk through all the sections of the proposal. You need to find them on the website. Looking forward to seeing people's proposals.
Thanks.
We're just wrapping up the technical part of this. So we'll close shortly. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again. Bye.